Hebrews 7 verses 4 to 10. The priest who receives homage, bestows blessing, and commands lineage. See how great he is. Not speculate, not admire, but see. The writer invites us to fix our gaze upon a scene both ancient and alive. Abraham, weary from battle yet radiant with faith, returns from the valley of victory. In his hands glint the spoils of war. Before him stands a mysterious priest-king, Melchizedek, whose name means king of righteousness, and whose city is peace. There, upon that quiet plain, history bends toward heaven. The patriarch, the father of the covenant, the bearer of the promise, bows before one greater than himself. This moment is no narrative ornament, it is divine design. Before the law was given, before Levi was born, God staged a meeting that would expose the insufficiency of all future priests. For if Abraham, fountainhead of Israel's faith, pays homage to Melchizedek, then the entire Levitical order, still latent in his loins, is already shown to be lesser. The scene whispers what the gospel would one day declare. The shadow bows before the substance, the law before grace, the servant before the son. In Hebrews 7 verses 4 to 10, the Spirit unveils three acts: homage rendered, blessing conferred, and lineage subordinated, to prove that Christ's priesthood is not only superior but indispensable, so that all striving systems might fall silent before the sufficiency of the living priest. First, homage rendered, greatness confirmed by the greatest, verse 4. Picture the moment. The desert wind has stilled. The clang of swords has faded. Abraham, hor patriarchos Abram, stands before Melchizedek and, with deliberate hands, offers him a tenth of the spoils. The writer lingers. Even Abraham the patriarch gave him a tenth. That word even presses the point. Even the patriarch, the man to whom nations were promised, the friend of God, renders tribute. Thayer notes that the verb apedekatosen signals a voluntary consecration, not a legal obligation. This act occurs before nomos, before the Mosaic Code ever required a tithe. It is not law responding to command, but faith responding to greatness. Calvin called this divine choreography, God arranging history so that grace precedes regulation. Haldane adds that Abraham's gift was the patriarch's confession that another stood nearer to God than he. The direction of the tithe reveals the direction of rank. Kittle observes that Hebrews measures greatness not by descent, but by the flow of honor. Who bows, who blesses. Abraham gives, Melchizedek receives. And in that exchange, the entire hierarchy of Israel's future priesthood is quietly overturned. This is greatness by proximity to God, not by pedigree. It is priesthood not earned, but bestowed. Under Moses, the scepter and the censer were kept apart. Kings could not be priests, priests could not be kings. Yet here, centuries before Sinai, both meet in one man. In Melchizedek's figure, royal authority and priestly mercy kiss. And in Christ, that union becomes flesh, the king who intercedes, the priest who reigns. What Abraham glimpsed dimly in the twilight, we behold in full day, the glory of a priest before whom every patriarch must bow. Second, blessing conferred. Authority flows from the greater, Hebrews 6-8. And without dispute, the author declares, the lesser is blessed by the greater. The silence around that moment is its own testimony. Abraham, who had heard God's voice, now stands still while another speaks grace over him. The hand that held the sword now opens to receive benediction. The act is not courtesy, it is covenant. The Greek, logeo, Thayer explains, means not simply to wish well, but to speak effectually, to utter a word that bestows what it declares. When Melchizedek blesses Abraham, he acts as the mouth of God. And Hebrews insists that blessing flows only one way, downward. The one who blesses stands as the greater. The one who receives confesses dependence. The entire covenant order turns upon this truth. Grace always descends. Then the writer contrasts the mortal with the immortal. In the one case, tithes are received by men who die, but in the other, by one of whom it is witnessed that he lives. The phrase, matrimenos hortize, draws its power from Genesis silence. No genealogy, no obituary, no record of succession. The absence becomes theology. Melchizedek abides in the text as a living type, a perpetual priest within the story itself. Schreiner notes that the author reads Genesis as theology through narrative omission, the unrecorded death prefiguring a death that could not hold the true priest. For if the shadow is witnessed as living, how much more the substance? Christ's priesthood rests not on textual silence, but on historical resurrection. He lives forever to intercede. Hebrews 7 verse 25. His ministry unbroken by mortality, his blessing undimmed by time. Abraham's blessing fades into the centuries, but the word spoken over those in Christ endures. What Melchizedek signified in mystery, Jesus secures in reality. The blessing that once fell on a single man now floods a multitude, for the risen priest's benediction is not symbolic but saving. Third, lineage subordinated. The root bows before the branch exists, verses 9 to 10. The argument crescendos with holy irony. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. To modern ears, the logic sounds strange, but in covenant thought, the head and his descendants form a single corporate person. Robertson calls it federal identity. What the head does, the body does in him. When Adam sinned, we sinned. When Abraham bowed, Levi bowed. The unborn priesthood of Israel rendered homage before it ever offered sacrifice. Calvin saw here the humbling of the law before grace. Hodge called it the most decisive proof of subordination. For if the root pays tribute, every branch confesses inferiority. Longenecker adds that this is not rhetorical flourish but theological precision. The entire Levitical economy concedes supremacy to the Melchizedekian order before its own birth. In that logic lies the marvel of redemption. The law, though holy, was never sovereign. It served, as Paul says, as a tutor leading to Christ, Galatians 3 verse 24. All its sacrifices pointed to a greater blood, all its priests to a greater presence. When Levi bows in Abraham, the law bows in promise. The scaffolding stoops before the structure. The shadow kneels before the sun. And when Christ appears, rising from the tribe of Judah, the type gives way to truth. The eternal priest stands where the temporal once served. The homage of the patriarch becomes the worship of the redeemed. The one who received tithes through Abraham now receives the praises of every nation, because the lineage that once commanded now confesses. Reflections for today. Greatness reconsidered. Our world still chases its own mounts of merit, visibility, applause, influence, as if the measure of worth were the noise one can make. But Abraham, the most honored man alive, bowed before a priest whose name the world had never heard. The father of the faithful knelt in silence, not to a celebrity, but to one who simply stood nearer to God. True greatness is not seized by achievement. It is received through surrender. The church flourishes not when it performs to be seen, but when it kneels to be blessed. Every act of humility is a confession that the crown belongs elsewhere, in the hands of Christ, our greater priest. Blessing rediscovered. We live in a self-blessing age. Our devices feed us mantras of sufficiency. Our culture tells us to speak light into our own darkness. Yet blessing does not rise from the human heart. It descends from the throne. Abraham did not name himself righteous. He stood still and let grace speak over him. So it is with us. We cannot pronounce peace over our guilt or hope over our despair, but the living priest can and does. His word is not flattery but finality, forgiven, beloved, secure. The soul's rest begins when it stops talking to itself and starts listening to him. Mortality remembered. Every helper we lean on eventually grows weary. Careers end, friendships fracture, bodies falter. Even our best systems are, as Hebrews says, dying helpers for dying people. They comfort, not cure. But there is one of whom it is witnessed that he lives. His intercession does not expire. His mercy never takes Sabbath. When every earthly support crumbles, Christ remains, the steady pulse beneath the world's fading heartbeat. Faith is not stoic endurance. It is the quiet conviction that our priest still breathes for us. Humility restored. If Levi bowed in Abraham, then every lineage, every ministry, every denomination must bow too. The church forgets this when it begins to guard its traditions more fiercely than its testimony. But wherever Christ's priesthood reigns, pride loses its footing. Leadership becomes service. Methods become means, not masters. A Melchizedek-shaped community smells like righteousness and peace, conviction without cruelty, grace without compromise. When we remember that we are recipients, not proprietors, of grace, the air in our fellowship clears and worship feels light again. Worship renewed. Abraham's tithe was not tax compliance. It was worship in motion, trust enacted through giving. In an anxious world, generosity often feels like risk. But every gift declares the same creed: He is greater. Each act of surrender loosens the clutch of fear and lifts the gaze of faith. Worship is never subtraction. It is participation, joining the patriarch in confessing that all spoils belong to the priest-king who still lives. What began with a handful of treasure in Abraham's hands continues now in hearts that know their true riches are in Christ. In Abraham's bowed head, the believer sees the shape of every genuine faith: emptied hands, open heart, eyes fixed on the greater. The priesthood of Christ does not demand more of us. It delivers us from the futility of offering what can never suffice. We kneel not to earn, but to receive, not to perform, but to be perfected. The greater still blesses, still lives, still reigns. Conclusion. History speaks, grace replies. Melchizedek received homage, bestowed blessing, and commanded lineage, but only to cast the shadow of the one who would fulfill them all. The Levitical order was noble, but it was never final. Its priests died, its sacrifices repeated, its access remained veiled. But our priest lives. His offering is once for all. His blessing is irrevocable. His life is indestructible. So, kneel as Abraham knelt, not in uncertainty, but in awe. The greater still receives, still blesses, still lives. And from his royal hands flows the same benediction spoken long ago. Blessed be you by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Here ends the homage of earth and the beginning of heaven's peace. For the priest who stands above Abraham still stands for you.